I know you. You're the man who saved my daughter's life. Those words stopped Mark cold as he stared at the beautiful woman standing on his doorstep. How could his blind date possibly know about that day at the hospital, the day he thought no one would ever discover his secret? But before he could respond, his phone rang. It was the school calling about his son. Mark Thompson hadn't been on a date in 5 years, not since losing his wife to cancer and becoming a single father to their son, Ethan. At 42, he'd resigned himself to a life of work, parenting, and occasional lonely nights after Ethan went to bed. His sister had been trying to set him up for years, but he always found an excuse. This time, however, she'd been relentless. Her name is Claire. She's a pediatric nurse, divorced, no kids. Just coffee, Mark. 1 hour of your life. He'd finally agreed, but when Claire suggested they meet at his place first, she lived nearby and thought it would be easier, Mark felt a flutter of anxiety. His modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs wasn't exactly a showplace, but he'd spent the morning cleaning, with Ethan's reluctant help. Dad, why are you so nervous? It's just coffee, Ethan had asked, watching his father change shirts for the 3rd time. I'm not nervous, Mark lied, adjusting his collar. I just want to make a good impression. Because you like her already? Ethan raised an eyebrow, looking far too perceptive for a 10-year-old. I haven't even met her yet, Mark replied, ruffling his son's hair. Now go finish your homework before Mrs. Garcia picks you up for your playdate. When the doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m., Mark took a deep breath and opened the door. The woman standing there took his breath away, not just because of her striking beauty, with auburn hair and warm brown eyes, but because of the strange feeling of familiarity that washed over him. And then she whispered those words that made his blood run cold, I know you. You're the man who saved my daughter's life. Before Mark could process what was happening, his phone rang with the school's ringtone. His heart raced as he excused himself to answer. Ethan had fallen during recess and needed to be picked up. The school nurse suspected a sprained ankle. I'm so sorry, Mark said to Claire, already reaching for his keys. My son. I'll drive you, Claire said firmly. You're too shaken to drive safely. During the tense car ride, Mark's mind raced. How did this woman know about his anonymous bone marrow donation 3 years ago? He'd specifically requested to remain anonymous, wanting no recognition for doing what anyone would do. The little girl had been just 6 years old, fighting leukemia, and Mark had been a perfect match. The hospital had strict protocols about donor privacy. No one was supposed to know. At the school, they found Ethan sitting in the nurse's office, his face tear-streaked but brave. To Mark's surprise, Claire knelt beside his son with professional confidence. Hi there. I'm Claire. I'm a nurse, and I'm going to take a look at that ankle if that's okay with you and your dad. Ethan nodded, and Mark watched in amazement as Claire gently examined his son's ankle, her touch both professional and tender. Good news. It's not broken, just a mild sprain. Ice, elevation, and rest for a few days should do the trick. On the drive home, with Ethan in the back seat clutching an ice pack, Mark couldn't contain his questions any longer. How did you know about the donation? No one was supposed to know. Claire kept her eyes on the road. My daughter, Sophie, received bone marrow from an anonymous donor 3 years ago. All we knew was that he was a local man in his late 30s. The donation saved her life. She paused, her knuckles widening on the steering wheel. I never thought I'd find you. But how did you know it was me? Mark asked, bewildered. Claire glanced at him. I didn't. Not until I saw the scar on your wrist when you opened the door. The harvest site. I've seen enough of them to recognize it instantly. So this wasn't really a blind date set up by my sister? Mark felt a strange mix of confusion and disappointment. It was, Claire assured him. Your sister Jenny and I work at the same hospital. She has no idea about the connection. When she described you, I thought maybe, just maybe, but I wasn't sure until I saw you. Back at Mark's house, after settling Ethan on the couch with his favorite superhero movie, Claire and Mark sat at the kitchen table with the coffee they'd originally planned to share at a cafe. I've been searching for 3 years, Claire admitted. Not actively, they told me it was impossible, but I always wondered about the person who saved Sophie without ever asking for recognition or thanks. Mark stared into his coffee. I didn't do it for recognition. When I registered as a donor in college, I never thought I'd actually match with someone. Then when I got the call. He trailed off, remembering. My wife had just died. Helping someone else's child felt like. I don't know, like maybe it balanced the scales somehow. I'd like you to meet Sophie, Claire said suddenly. She asks about her cell buddy all the time. That's what we call you. She draws pictures of what she thinks you might look like. Mark felt his throat tighten. I'd like that. And I'm sure Ethan would too. From the living room, Ethan called out, Dad. Can Claire stay for dinner? She knows all about my ankle and stuff. Mark looked at Claire questioningly. Their coffee date had turned into something entirely unexpected. I'd love to, she replied, her eyes never leaving Mark's. But only if your dad promises this still counts as our first date. 2 weeks later, Mark stood nervously outside Claire's front door, a bouquet of daisies in hand. Their second date, their first official one without medical emergencies or revelations, was about to begin. But what made his heart race wasn't just seeing Claire again, it was meeting Sophie. The door opened, and there stood a small girl with Claire's auburn hair and a bright smile that lit up her entire face. Are you my cell buddy? She asked without preamble. Mark knelt down to her level. I guess I am. Sophie threw her arms around his neck with the uninhibited affection only children can offer. Thank you for saving my life, she whispered. Over Sophie's shoulder, Mark saw Claire watching them, tears glistening in her eyes. In that moment, something shifted in his heart, a space that had been closed since his wife's death cracked open just enough to let in a ray of light. The evening was filled with laughter as Sophie showed Mark her drawings and science projects, while Claire prepared dinner. It felt strangely familiar, like coming home to a place he'd never been before. After Sophie went to bed, Claire and Mark sat on her porch swing, the night air cool around them. I never thought I'd feel this way again, Mark admitted. After Lisa died, I was sure that part of my life was over. Claire's hand found his in the darkness. Life has a funny way of circling back, doesn't it? 3 years ago, a stranger saved my daughter without ever knowing her name. Now here we are. Here we are, Mark echoed, squeezing her hand. 6 months later, Mark stood in his living room, watching as Ethan and Sophie built an elaborate fort out of blankets and furniture. The two children had bonded immediately, Sophie taking on the role of protective older sister despite being a year younger. They're good together, Claire said, coming up beside him and slipping her arm around his waist. They are, Mark agreed. Ethan hasn't been this happy in a long time. The past months had been a whirlwind of family outings, quiet dinners after the children were asleep, and long conversations that often lasted until dawn. Mark had fallen in love with Claire's strength, her compassion, and the way she understood his grief without trying to erase it. But tonight was different. Tonight, Mark had a question to ask. After the children were finally asleep, Sophie in the guest room that had gradually accumulated her belongings over months of sleepovers, Mark and Claire sat on the back porch, a bottle of wine between them. I've been thinking, Mark began, his heart pounding. That sounds dangerous, Claire teased, but her eyes were serious. Our lease renewals are both coming up next month, he continued. And I was wondering if you and Sophie might want to make this arrangement more permanent. Claire set down her wine glass. Are you asking us to move in with you? I'm asking if we could find a new place. Together. Somewhere with enough room for all of us, maybe a yard for a dog. Ethan's been asking for one for years. Mark Thompson, Claire said slowly, are you creating a family with me? I think we already are a family, he replied. I'm just suggesting we make it official. Claire's eyes filled with tears. There's something I need to tell you first. Something I should have told you months ago. Mark felt a chill of apprehension. What is it? Sophie's leukemia, there's a 15% chance of recurrence. Her doctors are optimistic, but... She couldn't finish. Mark took her hands in his. Claire, listen to me. When Lisa got sick, I learned that none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. All we can do is love each other today, with everything we have. And if it comes back? Claire whispered. Then we'll face it together. All four of us. 1 year to the day after their first meeting, Mark and Claire stood in the backyard of their new home, surrounded by friends and family. Ethan and Sophie stood beside them, both children beaming with pride in their formal attire. As they exchanged vows, Mark couldn't help but marvel at the strange path that had led them here. How a single act of kindness, performed anonymously in a moment of grief, had circled back to bring him the greatest joy he could imagine. Later, as their guests mingled and the children chased each other across the lawn, Claire found Mark standing alone, watching their new family with wonder. Penny for your thoughts, she said, slipping her hand into his. I was just thinking about that day you showed up at my door, Mark replied. How terrified I was to let someone new into our lives. And now? Now I can't imagine our lives any other way. He pulled her close. You know, when Lisa was dying, she made me promise I'd find happiness again someday. I never believed it was possible until you whispered those words on my doorstep. Claire rested her head against his shoulder. Some might call it coincidence. I call it fate. Across the yard, Sophie and Ethan had gathered their friends for an impromptu soccer game, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. Their family wasn't perfect. There were still difficult days, moments of grief, and the shadow of Sophie's health concerns, but it was real and whole in a way Mark had never thought possible again. Hey, Claire said suddenly. Did I ever tell you that the day before your sister suggested setting us up, Sophie had drawn a picture of her cell buddy that looked remarkably like you? Mark raised an eyebrow. Really? Complete with the little gray at your temples that you hate so much, Claire laughed. When I saw you standing in that doorway, I almost couldn't speak. It was like seeing a ghost, or a miracle. Maybe a little of both, Mark said, pulling her close for a kiss as their children's laughter surrounded them like music. If you enjoyed this story of hope, second chances, and the unexpected ways love finds us, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us how small acts of kindness can change lives forever. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a whisper and a moment of recognition that changes everything.